My name is Cora Hayes. For most of my 28 years, I have lived in Port Blossom, a city that clings to the edge of a great, gray lake, its moods dictated by the seasons. In summer, the air is thick with the scent of water and blooming hydrangeas. In winter, a damp, bone-deep cold settles in, and the sky becomes a permanent sheet of pearl. I've always found a quiet beauty in its predictability. I work as an architectural drafter for Stonewater Design Group, a small but respected firm downtown. My days are spent in the clean, quiet world of lines and measurements, translating the grand, sweeping visions of architects into practical, buildable plans. I love the precision of it, the logic. There is a right way for a wall to meet a floor, a correct angle for a roof to shed the rain. It's a world of order, a stark contrast to the life I'd been living. It was only supposed to be temporary. That's the refrain I'd repeated to myself for 4 years. It was just until Dad's construction business folded after his second back surgery, just until Mom could find more than a few scattered house-cleaning clients, just until the tidal wave of medical bills receded, just until things settled. My acceptance letter for a master's program in a sun-drenched city out west gathered dust in a box under my bed, alongside daydreams of a small apartment with a balcony just for me. But the weeks bled into months, and the months stitched themselves into years, and there I was, still sleeping in the same narrow bed of my girlhood, the floral wallpaper I'd once loved now a faded, cloying reminder of a life I'd failed to outgrow. I was the dependable one. The steady one. The daughter who could absorb the pressure, the one who wouldn't shatter if you asked for just a little more. My younger sister, Cassie, was the one with potential. That was the word everyone used, a shimmering, protective cloak they wrapped around her. When she spent her evenings at art collectives instead of helping with dinner, she was nurturing her craft. When she blew her meager earnings from part-time gallery work on vintage clothes instead of contributing to groceries, she was curating her aesthetic. Cassie was a beautiful, unfinished sculpture, and I was the sturdy, unremarkable pedestal on which she was displayed. So I said yes. Over and over. I said yes when my parents' rent was 2 weeks late and the landlord's polite notes turned terse. I said yes to covering the utility bills through a particularly brutal winter, the kind where the wind off the lake sounds like a grieving animal. I took on freelance drafting work on weekends, my eyes burning from the screen's glare, just to keep our heads above the churning water of debt. I canceled a much-needed vacation with my best friend, Zoe, to stay home and help Dad with his physical therapy exercises. I learned to tiptoe past Cassie's bedroom door, to keep my music low, to make myself smaller in the space I was single-handedly keeping afloat. I was the family's silent, load-bearing wall. Lately, however, a new kind of silence had fallen over the house. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the heavy stillness of resignation. It was the silence of accepted roles, of a dynamic so deeply grooved we no longer noticed the path. They saw me as the infrastructure, the plumbing and wiring that made the house function. Necessary, but unseen. And the part of me that once dreamed of sunlit balconies and a life of my own, a part one thought had long gone dormant, began to stir with a faint, insistent whisper. The day the eviction notice was taped to our door, a stark white rectangle against the peeling paint, the whispers grew to a clear, steady voice. Mom dissolved into quiet, helpless tears. Dad stared at the paper, his shoulders slumping with a familiar, weary defeat. Cassie, for her part, locked herself in her room. I stood in the hallway, the scent of stale coffee and anxiety thick in the air, and I didn't feel panic. I felt a strange, cold clarity. Maybe it's time we bought a place, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet despair. They all turned to look at me as if I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Mom's crying hitched. Dad's brow furrowed in confusion. Cora, honey, we can't even make rent, Mom whispered, her voice ragged. I've been saving, I said, the words feeling solid and real in my mouth. I have a stable job. Good credit. I can figure it out. I looked from my mother's tear-streaked face to my father's tired eyes. It's time. A flicker of something hope, maybe, or just relief passed over their faces. Cassie emerged from her room, her own eyes wide. She walked over and, for the first time in what felt like years, gave me a genuine, tight hug. "You'd really do that," she breathed. Mom clapped her hands together, a small, prayerful gesture. Dad looked at me with an expression of such profound gratitude it almost broke me. And for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself believe that I was finally building something that might also, in some small way, be mine. The search for a house became my second job, my obsession. After clocking out at Stonewater, I'd spend hours scrolling through listings, my laptop screen glowing in the dark of my little room. I learned the language of real estate escrow, contingencies, fixed-rate mortgages. I drove through unfamiliar neighborhoods after work, peering at bungalows and two-story colonials, trying to picture our scattered lives fitting within their walls. A month later, I found it. A modest, three-bedroom cottage on a quiet, tree-lined street named Sycamore Lane. It had a small, welcoming porch with a swing already hanging from its rafters and a backyard dominated by a magnificent old willow tree, its branches weeping gracefully toward the lawn. It wasn't grand, but it felt kind. It felt like a place where you could breathe. The process was a bureaucratic marathon. Weeks of endless paperwork, of phone calls made from my car during lunch breaks, of scanning and emailing documents until my fingers ached. I met with a mortgage broker who looked at my finances with a discerning eye. "You've got a solid history, Ms. Hayes," he'd said, nodding. "Good income, low personal debt. You can do this." The down payment was the biggest hurdle. It was $25,000, nearly every cent I had painstakingly saved over the last 6 years, a secret fund I'd once earmarked for my own future. Watching that number disappear from my bank account in a single wire transfer felt like a physical amputation. A part of my own dream, excised for theirs. I signed the mortgage documents alone, my signature a lonely black line on a mountain of paper, legally binding me to 30 years of debt. My name, my income, my risk. But when the realtor, a kind woman named Karen, met me on the porch of the little house and pressed the cool, brass keys into my hand, a profound sense of pride bloomed in my chest, warm and unfamiliar. "Congratulations, Cora," she said, her smile genuine. "She's all yours." I stood on the porch for a long time after she left, just holding the keys, the metal growing warm in my palm. The setting sun filtered through the leaves of the willow tree, dappling the lawn in gold. "Mine." The word echoed in the quiet space of my heart. This was real. This was a foundation. Moving day was a blur of organized chaos, the kind that feels like progress. Robert, despite his bad back, directed the placement of furniture with the authority of his old contractor days. Linda, looking happier than I'd seen her in a decade, unpacked boxes of mismatched kitchenware, humming to herself. Even Cassie helped, carefully arranging her art supplies and scented candles in the largest bedroom, the one with the best morning light. She was treating it like her own personal studio. I didn't say a word. I just watched them fill the spaces, watched them bring their lives into the rooms I had secured. I watched the light pour into windows we didn't have to worry about a landlord covering. I chose the smallest bedroom for myself. It was tucked away at the back of the house, with a window that overlooked the willow tree but no closet to speak of. It was barely big enough for my bed and a small dresser. But as I sat on the edge of the mattress, the scent of fresh paint in the air, I felt a quiet contentment settle over me. This was enough. For the first time, I felt like I was home. A week later, I was on my lunch break, scrolling idly through my phone while sitting on a park bench outside my office. The crisp autumn air felt good on my face. Then I saw it. A new post from Cassie. It was a photo of her, standing on the porch of the new house, one hand resting possessively on the railing, her smile brilliant and wide. My heart gave a little squeeze of affection. She looked so happy. Then I read the caption. "So incredibly grateful to my amazing parents, Robert and Linda Hayes, for giving me my very first home. A place to create and dream. Feeling so blessed." I read it again. And a third time. The words blurred, then sharpened with a painful, crystalline clarity. My very first home. My coffee, sitting beside me on the bench, went cold. A low hum started in my ears, the sound of the world tilting on its axis. My fingers felt clumsy as I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice bubbly and bright. "Hey, Cora. What's up?" I tried to keep my own voice steady, to anchor it to something solid. "Cassie. That post on Facebook. The one about the house." "Oh yeah," she laughed, a light, airy sound. "Cute, right?" Mom took it. The lighting was perfect. "What do you mean, your first house?" The words came out flatter, emptier than I intended. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then, a subtle shift in her tone, a hint of defensiveness. "Well, I mean Mom and Dad put the deed in my name. It just made more sense, legally." I sat down hard on the bench, the wood pressing into my legs. The humming in my ears grew louder. I swallowed, but my throat was dry. "Why?" "I don't know," she said, her voice a little too casual. "Something about taxes or estate planning. They said it was better this way for the family." "Don't be weird about it, Cora. It's for all of us. Don't be weird about it." The phrase landed like a slap. My name was on the loan. My name was on every payment stub, every insurance document, every single piece of financial liability. I had poured my savings, my security, my future into the foundation of that house. And in a single, breezy conversation, I was being told I was just a guest. I ended the call without another word. I stared at the photo again, at Cassie's triumphant smile under a caption that had completely and utterly erased me. That evening, I walked through the front door of the house on Sycamore Lane. I didn't set my bag down. I didn't take off my coat. Robert was on the sofa, watching the evening news. Linda was in the armchair, folding a basket of laundry. Cassie was nowhere in sight. "We need to talk," I said. They looked up, their expressions placid, like I was a mild interruption to their evening routine. I held my phone out, the screen still glowing with Cassie's post. "Why is the house in Cassie's name?" Linda blinked, her hands stilling over a folded towel. Robert rubbed his forehead, a gesture I knew meant he was bracing himself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "It's not what you think, sweetheart," Linda said finally, her voice soft and placating. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Because I think I bought a house with my money and my credit, and my name is on none of the ownership papers." "We talked about it," Robert said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's about her future. Security. She's younger, she's still trying to get established. You're already on your feet." I let out a single, sharp laugh that held no humor. "On my feet? I've been holding this entire family on my feet for 4 years. I paid your rent. I paid your bills. I put every dollar I had into this place. And that's why, Cora," Linda said, her voice gentle, as if she were explaining a simple, obvious truth. "You've always been the strong one. You're stable. You can handle it. Cassie, she needs this. She needs the help. She's still finding her way. The scaffolding. The foundation. The pedestal. I was not a person to be invested in. I was the investment vehicle for someone else." "Don't make this a fight, Cora," Robert warned, his voice taking on a hard edge. "You did this for the family." "No," I said, the word coming out clear and cold as ice. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "I bought it. I signed the 30-year loan. I paid the down payment. And you took it, and you handed it to her like a party favor." They didn't deny it. They just sat there, their faces a mixture of guilt and stubborn justification. That silence, that lack of defense, hurt more than any lie they could have told. I turned and walked out of the room before the tears I refused to shed could fall. I didn't go to my little room. I went to the small filing cabinet in the hallway where Mom had meticulously organized all the household documents. The drawer stuck, then gave way with a groan. I thumbed past folders labeled utilities and appliance warranties until I found one marked house, deed and closing. Inside, nestled beneath copies of the inspection report and the closing statement, was a document I hadn't seen before. It was a quitclaim deed. It had been drawn up by the same attorney who handled our closing. It was dated 3 weeks before we had even signed the final papers. It transferred all future ownership of the property at 127 Sycamore Lane to Cassandra Hayes, designated as a familial gift. And there, at the bottom, notarized and official, was the signature of my father, my mother, and the lawyer whose services I had paid for. I sank to the floor, the documents sliding into my lap. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. This wasn't a last-minute decision. It wasn't a misguided attempt to help Cassie. It was a calculated plan. They had smiled at me over dinner, praised my hard work, thanked me for my sacrifice, all while they were actively, legally, signing my future away. They hadn't just erased me from the narrative. They had written me out of it from the very beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the small, borrowed bed in the house I didn't own and stared at the dark ceiling. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old house settling, every sound seemed to amplify the echoing words in my head. She needs this. You're stable. Don't be weird about it. It wasn't just what they had said. It was the crushing weight of what they hadn't. There was no apology, no recognition of the betrayal. In their minds, they had done nothing wrong. They had simply reallocated a resourcemito where they felt it was most needed. By morning, a lifetime of small, disregarded moments had unspooled in my mind, stitching themselves together into a tapestry I had spent years refusing to see. I remembered my grandfather, at Cassie's high school graduation, toasting to her as the one who was born to fly. I remembered an uncle pulling me aside after I landed my job at Stonewater, clapping me on the shoulder and saying, "It's good you're so practical, Cora. You'll always be the one to land on your feet." He meant it as a compliment, but it was a prophecy of burden. I remembered a Thanksgiving years ago, when I'd covered the entire grocery bill for the big family meal. My grandmother had whispered to my mother in the kitchen, loud enough for me to hear, "Of course Cora paid. That's what Cora does." Even my ex-boyfriend, Ben, had seen it. During one of our last, quiet arguments before he left, he'd said something that stung at the time. "You never choose yourself, Cora. I don't even think you know how." I had dismissed it as him being selfish, but now, the memory was a shard of glass in my gut. He hadn't been cruel, he had just been honest. I'd let him walk away without a fight because, deep down, I didn't believe I was worth fighting for. I used to think being selfless was a virtue, a noble calling. I believed that if I just kept giving, pouring myself out for others, eventually my own cup would be refilled. But I was wrong. All my endless giving had done was teach everyone around me that my well had no bottom. Cassie was treated with delicate care because she broadcast her fragility, her artistic temperament a shield against responsibility. I was handed burden after burden because they believed my strength was infinite. When Dad was recovering from his surgery, no one asked Cassie to take on a few more hours at the gallery. I was the one who logged extra hours of freelance work until 2 in the morning. When Mom was down with the flu for a week, it was me, not Cassie, who did the grocery shopping, cooked the meals, and managed the house. And now, after I had performed the single biggest act of service in my life, they hadn't hesitated for a second. They had simply taken the fruits of my labor and placed them in her hands. I thought again of the documents, of the lawyer's signature. Had he been complicit? Or had my parents spun him a convincing tale about a family arrangement, a simple estate planning maneuver? Had they all banked on the assumption that I would be too quiet, too dutiful, too conditioned to say yes to ever challenge them? I looked at the clock on my phone. 6:15 a.m. I slid out of bed, my movements stiff. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a sweater, my reflection in the small dresser mirror a pale, hollow-eyed stranger. I gathered the quitclaim deed and the closing statement, slipped them into a manila folder, and walked out of the house before anyone else was awake. The cool morning air was a balm on my hot face. It was time to stop being the foundation for a house that was never meant to be my home. The attorney's office was in an old, restored brick building downtown. It was nothing like the folksy, suburban office of the lawyer my parents had chosen. This one felt differently modern and serious. I sat across a polished mahogany desk from a woman named Judith Shaw. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air that I found immediately comforting. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathetic noises. She just listened, her gaze unwavering as I recounted the story in a low, steady voice. Then, she took the documents from my folder and began to read. She examined each page with a quiet, methodical focus, her fingers tracing the lines of text. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. When she finally looked up, her expression was neutral, but her eyes held a flicker of something that looked like steel. "The mortgage is in your name, and your name alone," she stated, her voice crisp. "You are 100% financially liable for this property for the next 30 years. The deed, however, as of the date of closing, was legally transferred to your sister, Cassandra Hayes." I nodded once, my throat tight. "So, there's nothing I can do?" "To reclaim the house itself, it would be an uphill battle," she said frankly. "You would have to prove you were defrauded or coerced into the purchase, and with your parents and sister presenting a united front, they will simply claim the entire arrangement was a gift from you. It would be your word against theirs." "Even though I paid for all of it?" The question came out as a whisper. "They will say the payments were part of the gift." "It's a messy, familial he said, she said, and judges are reluctant to wade into it." She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her legal pad. A thoughtful silence settled between us. "However," she continued, her eyes sharpening, "they have made a few critical errors. They've tried to manipulate a system they don't fully understand." I leaned forward, my heart giving a hopeful thump. "First, the gift tax. The value of this house far exceeds the annual federal gift tax exclusion. If your sister received this property as a gift, she was legally required to have you, the donor, file a gift tax return. And she, as the recipient of such a large asset, might have her own tax implications to consider." "Did she file anything?" "I have no idea," I said. "I doubt she even knows what a gift tax is." "Second, MS." Shaw went on, a new energy in her voice. "Your sister now owns a significant asset. Does she receive any kind of financial aid? Student loans? Government assistance that is contingent on her income or asset level?" The memory of a FAFSA form surfaced, of my mother asking me to help fill it out for Cassie 2 years ago. "She has federal student loans," I said, the pieces beginning to click into place. "They're in deferment. For economic hardship." A small, knowing smile touched MS. Shaw's lips. "Economic hardship is difficult to claim when you own a $250,000 house free and clear." "And finally, you mentioned she works freelance for a gallery." "Yes, but I think it's informal. Cash mostly." "Unreported income," she murmured, making a note on her pad. "The IRS takes a very dim view of that, especially when it's tied to an individual who has also failed to navigate property tax laws correctly." I left her office an hour later with a tight knot of dread in my stomach, but underneath it, something else was humming. It wasn't a thirst for revenge. It was the clear, cold, and strangely empowering hum of focus. They had built this trap themselves. I wasn't going to spring it. I was just going to let them walk into it. That night, in the sterile quiet of a cheap motel room I'd rented, I opened my laptop. I didn't go back to the house on Sycamore Lane. I couldn't. I started digging, not with anger, but with the cool precision I used for my architectural drafts. I found the student loan records online. Over $30,000 in federal loans, all currently in deferment. I pulled up the county property assessor's website. No gift declaration had been filed. The tax records were still linked to the previous owner, waiting for the new deed to be processed. They had been so focused on securing the asset, they had forgotten about the system that governed it. I made a list on a clean sheet of paper. IRS tip line anonymous report for potential gift tax evasion and unreported income. Department of Education anonymous report regarding asset ownership affecting student loan deferment status. State Tax Board inquiry regarding property tax declaration for new owners. I wasn't burning their house down. I was simply letting the proper authorities know that someone had left a door wide open, and it was their job to walk through it. I typed out 3 separate, dispassionate emails citing facts, dates, and public record numbers. I hit send on each one, and with every click, I felt a weight I hadn't known I was carrying begin to lift. The first call came a week later. It was a voicemail from Cassie, her voice thin and high-pitched with a panic she was trying to conceal. Cora? Hey, can you call me? I got this really weird letter from the Department of Education, something about my loans. And the IRS? I don't understand any of it. It's probably just a mistake, but just call me when you get a chance. Okay. I deleted the message without a flicker of hesitation. A few days after that, Linda called. Then Robert. Their messages were a blend of confusion and carefully worded pleas. Cora, honey, Cassie is very upset. This tax thing is a misunderstanding. Could you help her sort it out? You're so good with paperwork. They never said, we're sorry. They never said, we were wrong. They just said, fix it. I sat in the small, furnished studio apartment I had rented, a place with clean, white walls and a single, perfect fiddle-leaf fig in the corner, and I let every call roll to voicemail. I sipped my tea and watched the afternoon light slant across my floor. My floor. My peace. My silence. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them a thing. 2 weeks later, there was a frantic knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Cassie standing in the hallway, clutching a thick manila envelope to her chest as if it were a life raft. Her mascara was smudged, and her usually perfect hair was scraped back in a messy, anxious bun. I took a deep breath and opened the door, but only part way, keeping the security chain latched. Cora, she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. I didn't know. I swear. About the taxes. They're saying I owe thousands of dollars in penalties. I don't have it. I don't have anything. I said nothing. I just looked at her. Her gaze dropped to the floor. And my loans, they pulled my deferment. The payments start next month and I can't. The gallery let me go. They said they're being audited and they're restructuring. Cora, please. She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I never meant for any of this to happen. I just thought Linda and Robert said it was the best way. For the family. I didn't know it would be like this. I finally found my voice, and it was calmer than I ever thought it could be. But you posted the picture, Cassie. You wrote the caption. You stood on that porch, and you claimed it. In front of the whole world, you made it yours. I didn't think, she whispered, her voice cracking. That's the problem, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. You never do. And then I closed the door, sliding the deadbolt home with a quiet, decisive click. It was 3 more days before my mother called again. Her voice was no longer pleading, it was sharp with accusation. She is your sister, Cora. She is in over her head. She always is, I replied, my voice even. And I have always been the one to pull her out. I paused, letting the silence stretch. And now, I said, she's old enough to learn how to swim on her own. I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, another official-looking letter arrived, mistakenly forwarded to my new address. It was addressed to Cassie from the state. Another fine, another penalty. I placed it in a fresh envelope, wrote her name on the front, and left it with the concierge at her new apartment building. That night, I slept through the night without grinding my teeth for the first time in years. By early spring, the house on Sycamore Lane was gone. A notice of foreclosure, citing loan default and unpaid property taxes, was posted on the door. I never drove by to see it. I didn't need to. In my heart, I had stopped seeing it as mine long before the bank did. Cassie, I heard through my friend Zoe, had moved into a cramped apartment with 2 other roommates, working a retail job at the mall to make her student loan payments. My parents had gone back to renting a small, grim duplex on the far side of the city, the kind with yellowed vinyl siding and a constant hum from the nearby highway. They didn't tell me they had moved. I found out when a piece of their mail was forwarded to my address by mistake. In May, I closed on a 1-bedroom condo in a quiet, older building with a creaky balcony and slightly outdated kitchen tiles. It was small. It was imperfect. But the morning sun flooded the living room, and the evenings were blessedly quiet. It was more than enough. I paid the down payment with the new savings I had started to build. I signed the mortgage papers, my own name clear and strong on the dotted line. There were no family members present, no celebratory photos for social media. It was just me, the realtor, and the notary. I was signing for something I had earned, with no one's permission but my own. A week after I moved in, a letter with no return address appeared in my mailbox. The handwriting was Cassie's. Inside were 5 pages, a long, rambling confession filled with apologies, explanations, and regret. She wrote that she never understood what the house had truly cost me, that she had been swept up in our parents' narrative, that she wished more than anything she could undo it. I read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in the back of a drawer with my old passports and birth certificate. There are some things you don't need to reply to, not out of anger, but because you have finally stopped needing the other person to see you clearly in order to see yourself. I met someone last fall. His name is Owen. He's a landscape architect, a man with kind hands and a quiet way about him. When I eventually told him the story of the house, he didn't offer advice or judgment. He just listened, and when I was finished, he said, "That must have hurt so much." He knows how to ask before assuming. He knows how to be still when silence is the most compassionate answer. It has been 6 months. My condo smells of lemon oil and the fresh rosemary I keep in a pot on the windowsill. I paint on the weekends, big, abstract canvases full of color, something I never made time for before. Owen often comes over on Sundays. Sometimes we talk for hours, other times we just sit on the balcony, reading our own books, comfortable in a silence that asks nothing of me. My phone rings far less now. Linda calls every few weeks, her voicemail softer, tinged with a hesitant respect. She hasn't managed the words, "I'm sorry," not yet. But I think she understands that the role I used to play has been permanently retired. Cassie hasn't reached out since the letter. I hope she's learning to swim. Tonight, while sorting through a box of old papers, I found a photograph. It was the one Cassie had posted, of her smiling on the porch of the house on Sycamore Lane. I looked at it for a long moment, at the ghost of the woman I used to be, the one who existed just outside the frame. I turned the photo over and wrote on the back in firm, black ink, a lesson. Then I slipped it into a box I had labeled, things to let go of. I walked to my living room window and looked out at the lights of Port Blossom twinkling against the dark water of the lake. For so long, I thought a home was a place you were given. I thought it was 4 walls built by someone else. I know now that a true home is a sanctuary you build for yourself from the inside out. It is a structure made of boundaries, self-respect, and the quiet courage to choose your own name, your own peace, your own life. And as I stood there, in the warm, gentle quiet of the space I had made, I felt its foundation, solid and deep and unshakable. It was finally completely mine.